Meghan Angley here in Ball Arena. Avs just closed out the first game of a 5-game homestand against the New York Rangers with a 3-2 overtime win, but I don't seem that enthusiastic because it took a lot to get this result. They didn't particularly deserve to collect these points, but they did. It's really important in the overall big picture. But Jared Bednar described the night as unimpressive. He said that half the team showed up and he was just trying to figure out how to play the players who seemed like they cared. Devon Toews kind of echoed that sentiment, saying it just wasn't good enough. They're going to have their hands full with the rest of the teams that they face on this road trip, so it's a big gut check for the Avs tonight. Important points, though. An OT thriller thanks to Devon Toews and hard work from Logan O'Connor to bring about the victory. But let's get into some of these questions that came in when things were pretty hairy for the Avs. I know it won't last forever, but is this the longest streak in years any Avs goalie has had allowing 2 goals or less? Wanted to start with a positive one and shout out the effort from Mackenzie Blackwood in between the pipes. He came up with huge saves all game, starting in the first period into that OT period where they had to kill off a penalty. But going back to the game, so many giveaways, odd man rushes, partial breakaways. It was just pretty unacceptable miscues on behalf of the team playing in front of him that he had to try to come up with saves in some pretty high danger situations, to include a shorthanded goal on the Avs power play. Don't worry, there's plenty of questions about that too. Mackenzie Blackwood, I understand that maybe this level of performance isn't believably sustainable, but I also don't want to discount the fact that he's just playing really well and he's stringing together these games consistently. I don't want to rule out that we just have an elite goaltender on our hands. I just don't think there's accountability in the locker room. McKinnon has the senior status, but is also our best player. Sakic needed Waugh, Sakic needed Bork, Landy needed Cogliano. The Avs need an external vet to demand accountability from all players. I think this is such an interesting comment because I felt like Devon Toews represented that voice in the postgame, and it's maybe not a voice that we see discussed in the same way that Cogliano was, because we got to hear a little bit more about how he was vocal in the room. Toews is a quieter guy around media. He doesn't particularly love to do media availability all the time, but I think he's much more vocal around the team than he is around us. I think back to last season, the Chicago game where the Avs dropped that they should have won, kind of similar to what they just did on this last road trip, and Devon Toews came out with scathing comments about how there are guys on this team who think they're certain types of players and don't understand their role and aren't playing to their role. And I think it enacted a huge change in the team following those comments publicly in the media. And so I think the players have this grace period before media even enters the room where they can say things like that to each other. So anytime a player takes those types of comments to the media, they're breaching this layer very intentionally. And I think that's sort of true even tonight with Devon Toews opening up the availability, talking about how it just wasn't good enough. And he didn't stop there. He went into detail about all of the aspects of their game that just weren't up to par. And so I think if you're hearing it in the media from Toews, just know it's being talked about, amplified that much more behind closed doors. I do love the idea of a Cogliano type player also being in the room. I think that his type of leadership is sorely missed to sort of complement what Toews brings to the table, but I don't want to undersell it. Manson, another player that springs to mind that has a kind of different quiet leadership that happens more behind closed doors than we're privy to, but I think it's an excellent comment. I don't mind more leadership around the room, but I don't think it's completely lacking either. This one, when do the leaders start leading? This is unacceptable hockey. Jared should bench the entire first PP. They don't care anyway. I really wanted to key in on the power play. We talked about the leaders already, but they allowed more shorthanded chances on net than they created tonight. It's just unacceptable from the power play, top to bottom. Obviously, the top unit carrying the brunt of that responsibility because of who they are as players. They're elite players. They're regarded as the best in the NHL, and this is usually a top-of-the-league power play. It started that way at the beginning of this year, and month by month, it has fallen off. As the Avs have seen strength in net, their PK has continued to trend upwards, but the power power play has just fallen off. I see the word predictability thrown around in trying to diagnose what has been going wrong for them, and I definitely think that's an aspect of it, but I think it only becomes predictable when they abandon the things that have made the power play successful in the past, and that is a little bit of the variety that they actually are capable of. I think that, Rantanen, he can do the one-timer from the right circle, or he can play below the goal line and complete some passes that seem impossible. Sometimes I think they try to force beating that too much and overpass on the power play, and other times I just don't think the attack mentality is there for them. And so they're going through the motions of what is the general outline of the Avs power play, and to that it absolutely is predictable. But the thing that built around the general outline of the Avs power play that made it such a threat was the variety and the deception that they can utilize on that power play. I know people have been critical of the entry consistently being McKinnon, and it's predictable in that way, and I think it can be hard to contend with if, in addition to the entry, it's met with the effort and the speed, and I think that's what's been lacking from it too. When I talked about a gut check, that's another aspect of this team that they need to look inwards on. The man advantage should be an advantage. It should not be to the detriment of this team in allowing shorthanded chances and goals against. Middlestat being put to the fourth line, is this becoming an issue now? I think we are going to put a little bit of time aside to talk about Middlestat on a show, so I won't go into too much detail in the post-game, but it's absolutely an issue. Jared Bednar talked about how the lines shuffled in the third period, and it was a direct result of who he felt cared about this game. Middlestat being the one kind of coming out short end of that stick with very limited ice time to close out this game. It's obvious how Bednar feels about where his effort is at. I think with Middlestat, it continues to be an issue of he needs to move his feet. I think that line having nights where they're the best possession line with a Ross Colton or worst possession line is a high and low roller coaster that they can't afford to be on right now. The top six is far too incomplete. They don't even have four lines to really roll. Jason Polo, and a young player, 4 minutes played tonight. There just isn't enough trust to go around the rest of the lineup if Casey Middlestat's having an off night. All right, we'll begin winding this down now. Thoughts on Malinski tonight? He sat the first half of the third. You guys know I'm a big Sam Malinski believer. He had a tough night. I don't think his mistakes were effort-based, but I do think they showed where he has more room to grow, maturity-wise. There's some panicked mistakes, a turnover in the slot in his own end in that first period, and then the goal, Edstrom, is because he's got pressure on his back along the wall in the defensive zone, and he throws the puck to Middlestat, and I think people kind of blame Middlestat for not being able to receive that pass, but it was under duress, and so it had a little too much mustard on it. I don't think Middlestat stood much a chance there either, so not the best showing from Malinski on either end. Usually at least a defensively responsible player. It was just not his night. I'm not going to begin panicking about him outside of this game. It's one that he needs to reset and move on from. All right, you guys, that's going to do it for tonight. We'll be back with some practice coverage tomorrow, and then Edmonton is in town, so it doesn't get any easier from here. Bye.